Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and lots of love to you. Big hugs as well. I hope you've had a fantastic day and go get yourself something lovely to drink. I'm having a refreshing lemonade with some lime in it and it's absolutely delicious. So go and get yourself something lovely to drink, and if it's something I haven't heard of, I'd love to know about it. And tell me what the weather's like where you are. It's a lovely day here, so I hope it's the same for you. So let's get started with part 2 of our story now. Alice has come all the way from Galway in Ireland because she's inherited her grandmother's apartment in New York. Her grandmother's died and the apartment has been left to her, and she's taken a year off from her job in Galway where she works as a recruitment consultant, and so she's in America and she's thinking of going travelling, and she's met the next door neighbour who actually lives in Florida but sometimes spends a couple of weeks in her flat in New York. And this this woman who lives next door to Alice's late grandmother's apartment has met up with Alice and has told her about how people go missing in national parks and how it's probably not a good idea to go travelling alone. So Alice is taking this advice to heart. So let's see where the story takes us, but before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with part 2 of our story tonight. I'm very glad, Alice, to hear how sensible you are. You are certainly wise for your years, I must say. I'm sorry to hear, though, you want to sell your late grandmother's apartment. If I were you, I would hang on to it for a while until you decide if you really do want to sell it. I mean, these stunning apartments are one of a kind, let me tell you, steeped in a rich, vibrant history. It would be a dreadful pity to let a place like this go too quickly. I never believe it's good to rush anything. Thanks to my father, of course, who taught me to hold back on any impulsive whims of mine, which I had many as a young girl, I might say. My father always used to tell me, think on it for a while before you're too hasty. Believe me, back in the day, it would frustrate me to no end. I didn't know the meaning of the word patience. If I wanted something, I had to have it today, not tomorrow, right now. I vividly remember that one day on my way home from school, I observed this dashingly gorgeous red pair of shoes in the window of this fancy boutique here in New York. You see, I grew up here. I was born and raised in this city. And so I would walk home passing these magnificent boutiques on my way home from school. And I remember standing outside this boutique window, my mouth dropping wide open in absolute awe and wonder, as I observed this dazzlingly enticing pair of red shoes in the window. The shop I was looking at was a very glamorous boutique, serving an elite, very exclusive clientele, all that had plenty of money. The place doesn't exist today, I'm sad to say. It sounds perfectly lovely, I said. Oh, Alice, you have no idea. Some of the shops back in my day were so exclusive, let me tell you. I doubt this particular boutique had many customers my age, falling passionately in love with their shoes. I rushed into the boutique and asked the glamorous lady there how much the shoes cost, and if they had those gorgeous red shoes in my small size. I remember how surprised I was that they actually did. The woman looked really taken aback that a little girl such as myself was showing interest in some of her shoes. I nearly fainted when she told me how much they cost, but I realized I could afford to buy them, and so I could potentially fulfill my dreams. As a little girl, you wanted to buy a pair of adult shoes from a fancy boutique? I asked, looking quite impressed. Oh, you have no idea, Alice. Yes, I wanted them with all my heart. I rushed home to grab my pocket money that I'd saved up for many months. I had one of those China piggy banks, you see. You have to break them to get your money out of them. I smashed mine on the floor of my bedroom, and my father darted into my room to find out what on earth was going on and what the dreadful noise was about. I think he thought I'd broken something. He realized it had been a deliberate act on my part because I'd broken open my piggy bank and there was money lying scattered all over the floor. Because I wanted to make a very serious purchase. Well, that's what I told him anyway. I told him I'd seen a pair of shoes in the shop window that I wanted to buy. And when I told my father the price of these exclusive shoes, well, he nearly had a coronary arrest on the spot, let's just say. I bet he did, I giggled. You must have had extravagant taste as a kid. I don't suppose that's changed, judging by how well you're dressed. Thank you, dear. Well, my father thought that a kid of my age should not be buying such expensive shoes, because it was terribly impractical. But I stubbornly told him I had to have them, and that I couldn't possibly live without them. Suffice to say, my father was rather cunning. A very wise man he was. He stopped me in my tracks from buying those shoes on a whim. He wouldn't let me leave the apartment to go to the boutique. He said I needed to wait a couple of days. Don't do that just yet, he told me. Those shoes aren't going anywhere, love. I'm sure they have many more in stock, or they wouldn't have displayed them in the window. Think on it for a while, and after 2 days, if you really want to buy those red shoes with your pocket money, you'll have my blessing. But I want them now, Daddy, I insisted belligerently, stamping my foot on the ground. I thought my father was completely mad. I desperately wanted those red shoes more than anything else in the world. You had it bad, I chuckled. That's an excellent way to put it, Alice. I had it bad. I dreamt of those shoes and couldn't imagine my life without them, quite literally. But after 2 days of passing those beautiful red shoes in the window that made me drool like a dog over a bone, a couple of days later I suddenly found fault with those perfect red shoes that I desperately wanted to buy. For a start, I realized how grossly impractical they were, and that I didn't have anything that I could actually wear them with, and they were probably far too grown up for me anyway. And then I decided I didn't want those shoes after all, and they lost their gloss to me. I ended up spending my savings on an adorable Maltese puppy that I called Snowdrop, which was so much better than a pair of red shoes, let me tell you. Snowdrop brought me the kind of happiness that no material thing could ever have done. I guess the moral of the story is similar to when people marry in haste. What do? They repent in leisure. Never was a truer saying ever said. My father taught me valiant lessons like that, let me tell you, Alice. Your father sounds like he was a very wise man, and you, Mrs. Morley, have become exactly like he was. His influences on you are profound. That's clear to see. That's what a good father does if he's a leader. He helps shape you. That's what my father did. He taught me so much, you know. And one of the things was we shouldn't rush our decisions, unless, of course, we have to think quickly on our feet, just like when you purchase a property. Let's just say when it comes to real estate, you can never afford to sit on your laurels, or someone else will steal your dream home from beneath your feet before you've even finished sneezing. I know when we bought our property in Florida, I never played any games with our estate agent, because I knew the property could slip through our fingers like butter, and I knew we could potentially lose our dream home. Because if we were too late to make an offer, or too stingy perhaps, then, well, the property might not get into our possession in the end, which would be ridiculous because every property goes up in value. So at the end of the day, you're making an investment, are you not? Anyway, dear, look at me. I'm rambling on. The gist of what I'm trying to say is that these apartments are pretty special, you know. They're Victorian, and they've been well maintained over the years. Once you put this apartment up for sale, it'll be snatched up in seconds, let me tell you. And you might live to regret such a hasty decision. My suggestion is to sit on it for a while, like I did with those red shoes all those years ago. Everything you say makes perfect sense, Mrs. Morley. But the truth of the matter is I think I should sell Granny Pippa's apartment, only because I don't intend to stay in America for the foreseeable future. Let's face it, all my friends and family are in Ireland, and I don't want to be cut off for them for too long. Family is everything to me. And besides anything else, my job in recruitment has been left open for me, so I've got to return to that. Oh, I can understand perfectly why you want to be close to family, said Mrs. Morley sympathetically. Why do you think me and my husband left New York in the first place? It was because our two older children, when they left New York, they settled down in Florida very happily, and we wanted to be close to them, beyond just retiring. My grandchildren live there too now. It's an exceptionally magnificent part of the world, you know. And over the years it's become a conservative stronghold. When you get older, you always grow more conservative by nature. Some people don't, but I certainly have. I suppose I embrace all those traditional family values that I hold so dear, which I believe are the cornerstone of life, here in America, that is. When you get to my age, family is everything, you know. I'm 82 years old now, which I've told you already. I'm a year younger than your grandmother was when she passed away, so I'm very aware I'm not getting any younger. Even though I will say this, I feel on the inside that I'm still young as I used to be anyway, although my body is beginning to show a little wear and tear, I have to say. So I know I have to take good care of myself in that regard. Mrs. Morley, you look great for a woman of your age, you really do. You were mentioning my grandmother a moment ago, but my father told me she died in the apartment here. He said he flew over to America for the funeral, and I remember him doing so. He was devastated to lose his mother. He loved Pippa dearly. I think it broke my grandmother's heart when all those years ago my father left America to marry my mother and to start up a brand new life for himself in Ireland. My dad said my grandmother never got over him leaving, but she didn't want to stand away in the path of true love. Well, that was Pippa for you to a T, said Mrs. Morley. Your grandmother was an incorrigible, hopeless romantic, and yes, it did break her heart that your father left America. But she was happy for him that he'd met your mother. Such a lovely woman your mother was too. Your father's visits to America were very special for your grandmother. She wasn't able to fly overseas, you see. Otherwise she'd have visited you all in Ireland, I'm most sure. But your grandmother happened to be terrified of flying. Otherwise she'd have loved to go overseas, that's for sure. I know my father told me Granny Pippa had a terrible irrational fear of flying. Dad said one time she did try to take an international flight to Ireland to come and see us, but she had such a panic attack at the airport she simply couldn't do it, and subsequently cancelled the flight. Mrs. Morley nodded. Pippa absolutely hated the fact she was terrified of flying. She went to see a hypnotherapist, you know, to help get over the phobia, but it failed to help her at all. I was the one that suggested she went to see this woman I knew, who came highly recommended. A couple of my friends had been to see her, and as a consequence had given up smoking, and I was sure it would work for Pippa. Sadly, it only made her paranoia about flying 10 times worse. So I guess hypnotherapy just doesn't work for everyone, does it? It was a pity that your mother couldn't come over to America herself and brought you along so that you could have met your grandmother. Pippa told me your mother didn't want to leave the family Pyrenees mountain dogs in somebody else's charge. So you and your mother stayed behind in Ireland to look after those dogs. But at least your father visited his mother regularly, and Pippa was delighted about that. She adored seeing her beautiful son. I know it's true, I said, hanging my head sorrowfully. Mum could never leave the dogs in somebody else's charge. She just wouldn't do that. They were everything to her. Don't apologize for that, dear. I think it's absolutely marvellous that your mother was such a devoted dog owner. There are a lot of people who refuse to travel because of their pets, and I understand that completely. Animals are family, and a lot of people here in New York have pets that they love like their own children. I have a very good friend of mine, doesn't live too far from here actually, Her daughter left home a few years ago, but her dog is forever at her side. She rewards her dog's loyalty, you know, by never going anywhere without him. She makes that a rule, you know." "Well, it's true my mother's always loved dogs like that," I admitted. "We always had mountain dogs. We have 2 New Pyrenees mountain dogs at home at the moment, as my mother would never own any other dog breed. She's a little obsessed like that. Scott and MacGyver are about 2 years old now. My mother would never leave them behind at home, for a second. So she's not going travelling any time soon, for sure." "Does your mother not want to travel at all?" "My mother says that her home is where the heart is. She thinks travelling is overrated. I just wish she'd have let me come to America with my father on one of his overseas trips, so I could have at least met my grandmother in person. I feel like I missed out in not getting to know Granny Pippa better. From what you and my father have told me, she was a remarkable woman." "That she was, without a doubt, my dear," said Mrs. Morley, smiling. "God broke the mould when he made your grandmother. She was one of a kind. I do know Pippa wished that you had visited her in America, but it wasn't to be, was it? But at least she spoke to you fleetingly on Skype from time to time. So I suppose she got to know you in a manner of speaking. But it's not the same as meeting someone in person, is it? I do know that Pippa said that your mother was the best thing that ever happened to your father." "Mum and Dad are great for each other," I agreed. "I think they may possibly be soulmates. They always seem to be able to finish each other's sentences, if you know what I mean. Sorry to change the subject again, Mrs. Morley, but I'm given to understand that Pippa died in this apartment. Is that true?" Mrs. Morley put a reassuring hand on mine and gave it a tight squeeze. "It's not as bad as it sounds, dear. Yes, your grandmother died in this apartment. I regret to say I was in Florida at the time. Pippa was a very religious woman. She'd invite the Father Thomas McCullen, I think his name was, around to tea every Tuesday afternoon like clockwork. They were close friends, you see. When Father McCullen knocked on the door on that Tuesday morning, he instinctively knew something was terribly wrong, because he couldn't get into the apartment no matter how much he knocked. He called out to your grandmother, and there was no answer. So he immediately contacted the police. They broke down the door of the apartment and found your grandmother was in bed. She had died in her sleep. The best way to go, if you ask me. I understand she looked very peaceful in death. They say your grandmother had only been dead for about 5 hours before she was found." "So she wasn't alone for too long?" I asked, looking relieved. "I think it's dreadful to die in your apartment on your own, with no one around. But it's a relief she was found quickly. I suppose that does put my mind at rest to a degree. It must be awful for a person's body not to be recovered for weeks on end. That would be so sad, don't you think?" "Oh, believe me, dear, around here in a buzzing metropolis like this, if you died in your apartment alone, everybody would know about it soon enough. When people live in close proximity to each other, the smell of death will awaken you to someone's passing. I'm told it's a smell you cannot forget. Honestly, I don't know why we're talking about such unpleasant subjects. We were talking about crocodiles earlier, and now death. Honestly, what are we like? When you get to my age, you don't want to think about death. You want to enjoy every moment that life has to offer you. I have a friend who's 87, you know, and this is the first time she tells me she officially feels old. I've got a few years to go before I reach that number, but time goes by so fast these days. Before I know it, I'll be blowing out the candles of my 87th birthday cake. And it's a horrifying thought." "But you still look young, Mrs. Morley. In truth, I'd never have guessed you were 82 years old, and I mean that sincerely. I know a woman in Ireland who's 102 years old. She's still walking around and works with her daughter running a boutique. She says she never wants to stop working. She says if she does, then she knows she'll die, because you need to keep busy and preoccupied. You need to have something to focus on, don't you? Otherwise, you don't find any point in living, I think." "What a remarkable woman," said Mrs. Morley approvingly. "I think I need to take some pointers from her. My biggest secret to staying young is I try not to get stressed about anything. If you enjoy your life and you live it to the fullest, focusing on what makes you happy, I think you can live a long, abundant life. If your mind's in the right place, of course. When I look at myself in the mirror, I realize that age has taken a physical toll on my body. But on the inside, I still feel like that 18-year-old girl I was once. I was genuinely shocked to hear Mrs. Morley was 82 years old. She looked as if she was in her late 60s or early 70s. She was such a delightful woman, and I had warmed to her at once. My conversation with her seemed to flow so seamlessly. Ostensibly, after not having any decent conversations with anyone other than the postman, who had told me how much he'd loved my grandmother, it had been nice to engage in conversation with two friendly New Yorkers. It helped me not to feel quite so alone. "You say you're 28, my dear," said Mrs. Morley reflectively. "For your information, my grandson Curtis is exactly the same age as you. If you want to go travelling, I might consider asking him to go with you. He's an entrepreneur, you know, so he doesn't have a fixed schedule of any kind. I could ask him if he would be willing to be your travel companion. He's been to Alaska in winter, but I know he'd love to visit the place in summer. I can ask him if he'd be willing to go with you." "That's kind of you to offer, Mrs. Morley. But you did just say that your grandson Curtis pulled that dreadful stunt on you with a crocodile in Florida. I'm not sure I could trust him to be my travel companion. Joking aside, I'm not going to go travelling immediately, I don't think. I need to see an estate agent and get an evaluation for the apartment. And I also want to weigh out all my options before I go travelling." "Well, my dear, when it comes to travelling or selling this apartment of your late grandmother's, my best advice to you is to follow your heart and to do what you need to do. But please give America a chance. That's what I say. You are half American after all from your father's side of the family. And even though you're obviously going to miss the island while you're away, and your loved ones, of course, living here, as far as I'm concerned, is a good idea. It's an opportunity for you to explore your roots and learn a little bit about America. I mean, what harm could it do?" "You're probably right." "But of course I'm right," said Mrs. Morley. "I'll have you know I'm seldom wrong about many things. I genuinely believe your grandmother Pippa would appreciate you staying in New York in her apartment for a while. I don't think she randomly left this apartment to you on a whim, you know. I think she genuinely hoped that if she put the apartment in your name, that you might decide to live here for a while. I can understand why you feel like a fish out of water here. But over time, even fish learn to adapt to a new environment. I've never been to the Emerald Isle myself, I have to say. I've been to London and Paris, and everything seemed so quaint and charmingly small over there. So I can only imagine how you feel from the other perspective, when everything seems so large to you here in America. You probably feel like you're going to be swallowed alive. But after a while, you'll get used to everything. And at your age, you're bound to be very resilient." I knew that Mrs. Morley was right, and that I should give America a chance. Maybe I shouldn't be so quick to sell my grandmother's apartment after all. I imagined my parents back in their little cottage in Galway, and I could feel a sorry lump developing in the back of my throat. Even though I got to speak to both of my parents regularly on WhatsApp, I still felt as if they were on the other side of the world, and as if I'd been cut off from them, and it wasn't a great feeling. I was out here to sell my grandmother's apartment and to take a year off. I had thought of hiking in some of the national parks here. My father had been to Yellowstone National Park and encouraged me to visit it as well. He said it was an indelible experience that he had never forgotten. My father was raised as a New Yorker growing up in the Big Apple. Once I arrived in America, I felt as if I'd been thrown right out of my comfort zone. I could not believe that my grandmother, whom I'd never really known, had left her magnificent apartment to me, which was a very generous thing for her to do, as well as a bit of extra money, which would certainly help cover any travel expenses that I might potentially incur. My father gave me an encouraging nudge and said, "Go on, love. Take a year off. Go to America. You've got no excuses now." When my boss in recruitment told me that he'd keep my job open for me, how could I refuse such an opportunity such as this? I knew it would be like looking a gift horse in the mouth, for not so many are as fortunate as I was in that regard. I'd only been in America for a short while, but everything continually felt so intimidatingly large for me, and I still wasn't easily adjusting to the bustling momentum of city life. I felt somewhat isolated and alone among so many crowds of people, although I had made a gallant effort to talk to strangers in order to feel a little less alone. But I'm afraid to say that most of the people I spoke to had been foreigners who were visiting New York for the very first time, as I was, and were very soon going back to their respective countries, so I wasn't exactly making any long-lasting friendships with local people. I was used to the vibrant green countryside of the Emerald Isle, quaint little stone walls, sheep's grazing in pastures, coastline views, along with quaint little shops, but being out here in the Big Apple seemed to be a world away from my Irish roots. My grandmother's apartment had really surprised me significantly, for I was expecting to be faced with a tsunami of clutter and chaos. I had anticipated stumbling across dusty boxes filled with memorabilia, and old clothes smelling of damp mildew and mothballs that were lying in sorrowful clusters in wardrobes, clothes perhaps from the 1940s that had laid in closets untouched for many years, like neglected gravestones in a cemetery, that had long since been forgotten about and had never been discarded, so they needed to be ruthlessly thrown out. I expected there would be hundreds of books cluttering the bookshelves, and for everything to be in absolute disarray. I imagined myself having to do a major throw-out of things in the apartment, or maybe a few home improvements here and there, before I could get the best price when I put the apartment up for sale. Instead, I was greeted to an apartment that looked like something fresh off a magazine cover. There were no dated furnishings, no clutter gathering dust around the apartment, and everything was in meticulous apple pie order. From one look at the apartment I would glean easily that my grandmother had been house-proud and extremely stylish, keeping in touch with the changing face of fashion. I had noticed she was a very elegant woman when I'd spoken to her on Skype a few times, but I'd never quite realized how efficiently organized she really was. Indeed, she made me look as if I needed to tidy up my own act, quite dramatically actually. I noticed her meticulous wardrobes boasted minimal but expensive clothes that were all tastefully selected and rather classic. Growing up, despite my father being American, I'd never had much of a desire to go to America, and I'm not exactly sure why that is the case. I guess I was more interested in visiting interesting places in Europe, rather like Italy, Paris, and Spain. I probably should have been more intrigued by my ancestral roots, but I wasn't really, and I don't even understand why. My father may have been American, but he was reticently reserved by nature, and over the years his American accent had faded significantly, and he'd developed an Irish twang to his voice that his late mother teased him about mercilessly. My father was the kind of man who focused on the here and now, and everything that was current. He never looked back to the past. Maybe it hurt him to think of all that he'd left behind in America, as he'd always been incredibly close to his mother Pippa, as his father had abandoned him before he was even born. So it was Pippa Wakeman that had raised him all on her own, so there had been an undeniable bond between the two of them. My father met my mother on a business trip to Ireland. He was involved in importing Waterford crystal to the American market. One day, after a hard day of negotiations, my father, who'd been staying at a local hotel to get a true feel of Irish culture, had taken a nonchalant casual stroll down the cobbled street that evening. He decided on a whim to pop into the local pub to enjoy a glass of ale before returning to his hotel. The pretty young lady who served him ale at the pub was no one other than my mother. My father was struck by this beautiful woman with the Titian colouring and blue eyes, and asked her if she'd consider going for a walk with him after she'd finished her shift at the pub. My mother was a warm, naive Irish lass, who was utterly charmed by this man with an interesting American drawl, for she'd never met anyone quite like him before. I think she found my father to be rather exotic, for he was certainly very different to the other Irish lads she had routinely dated over the years. My dad was somewhat a novelty to her, a novelty that she couldn't resist, So she threw her reservations about dating a perfect stranger to the curbside and went out with my father. My mother, being intrigued by this tall, dark, handsome man with the mischievous green eyes, offered to show him around the local landscape and introduce my father to some of her friends while he was in Ireland. My father told me on the first evening he met my mother, he knew then and there that my mother was the woman he wanted to marry. Before my father met my mother, he'd been a perennial cynic about relationships and marriage, probably because he was raised by his mother. But that all changed the moment he laid eyes on my mother. So maybe there rarely is such a thing as love at first sight. My father said after my mother had finished dealing with the rowdy customers at the pub that night, that were all getting way too drunk for their own good, for it was a Friday evening, so everyone was in a celebratory mood, knowing full well they didn't have to go to work the following morning. My parents took a walk together hand in hand, and ended up sitting on top of a small stone wall together, swinging their legs on a lackadaisical summer's evening. They gazed up at the stars together, contemplating the possibility of life on other planets, and they never stopped talking until the morning broke. My parents felt as if they'd known each other for a lifetime, as they instantly clicked. My father informed my mother that he'd be back in Ireland sooner than she could say grease lightning, and he was true to his word. My dad went home to tell his mother, Pippa Waitman, about the Irish lass he had met. My grandmother told him to follow his heart. My father acquired a job in Ireland, working with Waterford Crystal at the glass factory in Galway, and handling international negotiations concerning the exporting of the crystal. Within 2 months of moving to Ireland, my father and mother married in an intimate private ceremony. It was most unfortunate my father's mother, Pippa Waitman, couldn't attend the ceremony, but I'm afraid her fear of flying made the trip impossible for her. So on my parents' honeymoon, they both flew to America, where my mother met my grandmother for the very first time. I gather Pippa Waitman told my mother that she was the very best thing that had happened to her son, for she'd never ever seen him so happy. My mother would always visit Pippa at her apartment in New York in the early years of her marriage to my father, and it appeared they really liked each other very much. When my mother acquired 2 Pyrenees mountain dogs, a few years after she'd married my father, there came the end of her visits to Ireland. My mother adored Pyrenees mountain dogs, and growing up in Ireland we'd always had mountain dogs around us. They became like family to us. But the introduction of dogs in our lives put an end to all foreign trips abroad. I can honestly say I did not know Granny Pippa at all well, because you can't really learn all that much on a video call, can you? Now that I was here in America, after meeting the postman and Mrs. Trinny Morley, I was beginning to learn more about the wonderful woman who had raised my father single-handedly. I did ask my father once about who his real father was, but he got very short with me. "Why do you want to talk about that?" he snapped, unable to disguise the annoyance in his voice. I knew my question had irked him. "I'll tell you something for nothing, Alice. I want nothing to do with my biological father. As far as I'm concerned, the man can rot in hell for what he did to my mother. I don't know who he is, and I don't want to either." I guess it upset him that when his father realized he'd made his mother pregnant, he had done a runner. I'm surprised my father had no interest in tracing his roots on his father's side of the family, but my father was resolutely stubborn in his determination to never make contact with his biological father, and wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. I understand his mother knew who the young man was who'd made her pregnant all those years ago, and was willing to give my father the details so he could actually contact his real biological father should he wish to, but that was never going to happen. My father was not interested. My father's wounds clearly ran deep, so I never dared to broach the subject with him again. But coming here to America had certainly unearthed in me many more questions about my father's side of the family. The rain continued to patter down on the rooftop, but it seemed to be slowing down a little. I wondered if I could take my chances to go out to the 7-Eleven to pick up some milk for my tea. I've always been a big tea drinker, and it's difficult to get the morning started without tea in my system. I know many New Yorkers are avid coffee drinkers, but I've never caught the coffee bug, and could not see what the fascination was in such a bitter concoction. I can so easily drink 6 cups of tea a day, without any problems at all. I would have certainly popped over to Mrs. Morley's apartment to borrow some milk from her, which would have saved me from getting caught up in the rain. But by now she'd gone back to Florida. Her apartment was empty, and I didn't know any of the other neighbours. Mrs. Morley had said her goodbyes to me a few days ago. She hoped our paths would cross in the foreseeable future. She told me once again to be careful about any trips I took across America, and to find for myself a willing travel companion, as she was not sure it'd be safe for me to travel on my own. I was certainly taking her advice to heart and making plans about taking a trip to Alaska. I'd even picked up some brochures from the travel agent that I'd been studying at will. But as for a travel companion, I didn't know how to go about finding one. Little did I know that Serendipity had her own ideas on her mind. And on this rainy day, she was about to deliver me a special gift that I'd never see coming. So there we are, that is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.